And if that is truly an ingredient to surviving a hard totalitarianism, man, we're nowhere near this right now.
A few weeks ago, you talked about persecution of Christians in Zimbabwe. You mentioned that they would say we are facing, here in this country, a kind of persecution. And you used the phrase soft totalitarianism. What does it look like practically to resist soft totalitarianism? And in that question, I think implicit is, what is soft totalitarianism? Yeah.
Well, let me just give folks a little bit of a context because it's super important. The context is that I was on a panel with a guy who is now living in the United States, grew up in Zimbabwe under the persecution there of Mugabe and just a hard dictatorial totalitarianism. And he called what he saw with Barronel Stutzman, Jack Phillips, and other places in the United States, he called it, he was willing to call it persecution. And I just noted that it's usually folks who have gone through persecution. And this is anecdotal. I haven't done a formal survey on this, okay? But that people who have gone through real persecution are more than willing to say that what we're seeing in certain parts of the world is actually persecution. And you saw that emerges in Rod Dreher's book when he's telling the story of people who lived through kind of serious persecution under the Soviet Union that are looking at, with alarm at the cultural shifts in America going, it's coming, or this is actually a form of it, or this is how it began. And just a really interesting observation. And I'm not judging whether their analysis is right or wrong, just that they're more willing to say it than other people are. Or the people in my experience that are most willing to call what we're seeing here and use that P word, persecution. And I'm not willing to use the P word for the record in many cases, but the ones that are the ones who have seen it. So soft totalitarianism is basically a social pressure or a restriction on convictions, a hiding of the truth, a suppressing of the truth that comes through social pressures, either through corporate social pressures or through soft legislation or things like that, as opposed to kind of the dictatorial stuff that we've seen throughout human history or the full totalitarianism that we're seeing in China. The thought control, the social pressure that if you believe this, you can't really play here or work here or get a degree here or whatever. That's how Rod is talking about soft totalitarianism. It's noticing the difference that you're not going to get dragged off, beaten, and thrown in jail, but you might lose your job and your pension. You might lose social standing, and so. The question, what does it practically look like to resist it? I'm not sure that other than a question of degree, it's any different than what we read in these stories, which is why I think Rod's book, Live Not by Lies, is such a gift. It's because it tells these stories of Christians that survived the Soviet Union and how they survived and lived through this. I mean, they're remarkable stories. And what do you hear? I'll give you three things. Number one is a strong, dense community. That's one of the things, a sense of belonging, right? Number two, a clarity of what is true, right? You have that clarity that no matter what the social pressure, and going back to Narnia, I don't know why I'm going to Narnia so much today, but there's that time in the silver chair where, Aslan is giving the instructions to Jill Pole before she goes to Narnia. And he says something like, the air is super clear up here, but when you go into Narnia, it's not as clear. And in the middle of the chaos, it's not as clear. And so you have to have that clarity ahead of time. Third is a love for enemy. That's one of the things that emerges. Not a love for what your enemy is doing, but a love for your enemy, that you actually love them. The acts of forgiveness that we have seen in some of these stories to abusers, persecutors, the willingness to stand up for the persecuted by those who aren't being persecuted and then turn around and extend forgiveness. These are stories that change the world. And I tell you one of the things, and maybe I'm just still a little jaded. People are probably tired of me tired of me saying this, just because we did a commentary last week with my friend Jerry McDermott about President Biden's stutter and acknowledged something about his President Biden's willingness to fight through this disability that he had, the vitriol that came back on this was just stunning. That he was faking, that he's, and look, we were like, the commentary was so clear about how wrong President Biden is in all of his policies. And nothing wrong.
It's almost awkward how clear you made it in that commentary.
Well, and I didn't write it for the record. It was Dr.
Right.
McDermott, but I fully endorse it.
Right.
I would have said the same thing. Dr. McDermott had similar issues, and so there was a reason we had him do it, and it was his idea, and I thought it was fantastic. They're horrendous. They're awful. His policies, but what does it mean to love? I mean, look, love your enemy is still in the Bible, and what you see from these stories is that the ability to love, speak truth to them, tell them what they're doing, but to love your enemy is a really, really hard thing to do. I say that because I guess maybe I'm just, again, a little bit jaded, but if that is if that is a moral requirement of God for us, and if that is truly an ingredient to surviving a hard totalitarianism, man, we're nowhere near this right now for the moment we're in.